Hello there, and welcome back to the Sleep Science. The moon is low, and the sand beneath your feet is still warm from the day. It sighs softly as you shift your weight, heel to toe, and again as you move forward, the grain squeaking faintly under your steps. A faint breeze flutters through a nearby dune crest and sends a glimmering cascade of particles down its face, each one a microscopic monument to patience. You're not walking on just dirt or dust. This is time, pulverized. Millennia ground down into a golden ripple. A soft rumble sounds far off, perhaps a dune collapsing or the wind teasing an edge. Sand is always moving, even when it pretends to sleep. You could lie here forever, staring up at the stars, but here's the catch. You probably won't survive this place. Without water or direction, the desert is an elegant death trap, hot by day, freezing by night, and full of lovely illusions that will absolutely betray you. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I always like knowing where this sleepy little caravan is headed. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk farther into the dunes, the moonlight brushing the surface with silver. Every grain beneath you began its journey somewhere very different, on a mountaintop, in a volcano, or along the banks of a river that hasn't flowed in centuries. Sand is a product of violence and time, a testament to the relentless disassembly of stone. It's strange, then, how soft it feels between your toes. Each grain of sand you step on has endured more than most civilizations. You're stepping on bits of rock that have weathered glaciers, acid rain, the slow march of tectonic plates, and the occasional triceratops stomping overhead. These particles have been flung by storms, drowned in oceans, spat back onto beaches, and lifted into the air again. And still, they persist. Still, they gather, settling in basins and building the surface of the Earth's most iconic landscapes. As you crest another dune, a faint line of mountains smudges the horizon. You imagine them crumbling, not in explosions or earthquakes, but in the glacial, never-ending rasp of water and wind. Rain sneaks into cracks, roots wedge boulders apart, rivers tug pebbles along their beds like toys, and grain by grain, mountains become sand. Historians still argue whether early human migrations across deserts were intentional or accidental. Were we bold, or just really lost? Either way, the sand bore witness to it all. Think about the Silk Road, the endless caravans weaving through dunes, dragging exotic goods from China to Rome. Camels and traders left tracks that vanished within minutes, erased by wind as if they'd never existed. And yet, ironically, sand remembers. Archaeologists have found ancient trade beads from Egypt buried in Kenyan dunes, somehow cartwheeled across time and space. There are fossilized footprints in the sand near Lake Turkana in Kenya, left by early humans nearly 2 million years ago. Some were walking, some were running, some paused to look back. Sand holds on to that sort of thing, if only for a blink in geological time. You run your fingers through the nearest drift. It's cool underneath, dry but not lifeless. Sometimes, when the wind dies and silence thickens, you can hear the dunes breathe. Not literally, of course, but the sound of sand shifting as temperatures drop and particles settle, it's not nothing. Here's a slightly weird tidbit. In certain parts of the world, including Oman and California, dunes emit a low, vibrating hum when they move. Singing sand. Scientists are still arguing about whether it's caused by grain size, surface tension, or some esoteric combination of factors. Basically, nature's way of DJing in the key of what was that. You press your palm flat into the surface of a nearby slope and feel it yield just enough to let you in. Then it holds, like a memory, like quicksand without the ambition. In ancient Egypt, sand wasn't just background noise. It was a tool, a weapon, and a sacred boundary. Desert sands were believed to be inhabited by malevolent spirits called chaos serpents, which is both fantastic and highly inconvenient if you're trying to build a pyramid in their backyard. Pharaohs even poured layers of clean sand over tombs as a form of protection. Spoiler alert, it did not stop tomb robbers, but it did slow them down. You keep walking and a low ridge reveals itself ahead. There's something nostalgic about this place, even though you've never been here before. Maybe it's the way the light curves off the dune's edge. Maybe it's that sand, more than any other substance, reflects humanity's collective memory. Playgrounds and beaches, hourglasses and Zen gardens, sandbags in war, sand traps in golf. Okay, maybe not that last one. No one remembers those fondly. But here's something that might surprise you. There's more sand on Earth than stars in the galaxy. At least that's what astronomers believe. A single cubic meter of beach sand can hold hundreds of millions of grains. Multiply that by all the deserts, rivers, seabeds, and coastal shelves, and it becomes absurd. A quiet kind of absurd, like realizing your cat is older than most nations. Still, not all sand is created equal. Some grains are sharp, some are smooth, some are so fine they feel like silk, while others crunch like sugar cubes underfoot. The shape and feel of a grain tell its story, whether it tumbled down a river, was blown across a desert, or got coughed up by a shellfish. More on that later, you lucky thing. You find a spot to sit. The slope cradles you like a hammock woven from geology. Above, the stars blur just slightly, and a breeze whistles a lullaby through the nearby crest. You're still surrounded by sand, but now you're inside its story, and it has so many chapters left to tell. You scoop up a handful, letting the grains stream between your fingers like liquid time. The desert is patient. It waits. It shifts and sings and swallows, but always it remembers. You stand again, brushing the sand from your hands, though of course it clings. It always does. That's the thing about sand. It's annoyingly persistent, like glitter after a birthday party or that one mosquito that somehow gets into a zip tent. A single grain can wedge itself into your sock or between your teeth and remain there long after the trip is over. Why? Because sand doesn't just sit around. It infiltrates. The wind picks up a little and you squint as it tosses a veil of dust across your path. This is what erosion feels like in real time. Millions of grains in constant, invisible motion, dancing along the surface, nudging stones, gnawing at the bones of mountains. And here, where things get fun, those grains, they started as rock, hard, unyielding, cliff-face rock. You imagine it now, a towering formation, sharp and jagged, forged in the fire of tectonic collisions. Over millennia, frost seeps into its cracks. Rainwater becomes acid just acidic enough to weaken it. Roots pry into it like burglars. Temperature shifts cause expansions and contractions so small they seem meaningless. Until, suddenly, a boulder shears off and tumbles down, crumbling as it goes. It's all part of the very long and very slow breakup between rock and stability, and like most breakups, it gets messy. That boulder doesn't disintegrate immediately. It's battered over time, scraped by ice, licked by rivers, shoved by landslides. The process has a charming name, mechanical weathering. No romance, just physics with zero emotional intelligence. Historians still argue whether ancient quarrying techniques unintentionally sped up the natural weathering of some landscapes. Did our desire for temples and monuments actually contribute to long-term environmental shifts? No one's entirely sure, but it's possible that by chipping into mountains, we help jumpstart the sand production line. Anyway, after the rocks break down into gravel, the fun continues. Gravity helps pull the pieces downhill. Water becomes a taxi service. Rivers sweep them along, tumbling and grinding them into smaller and smaller particles. This is fluvial transport, which sounds fancy but mostly means that rivers are nature's lazy conveyor belts. Except these conveyor belts occasionally flood and wipe out nearby villages, so less lazy, more chaotic neutral. If you were to scoop a handful of river sand, you'd notice something different from the desert dust under your feet. It's rounder, smoother. That's because those grains have spent more time knocking into each other, bouncing downstream like drunk marbles in a long hallway. By the time they reach a floodplain or a delta, they're polished and exhausted. Retired geologists. But not all erosion is so gentle. Sometimes the rock isn't content to crumble. Sometimes it explodes. Volcanic activity can shatter rock into ash and pumice, glass-like shards that settle into black beaches or are blown into the stratosphere. In places like Iceland and Hawaii, the sands aren't beige, they're jet black, born from lava that kissed the ocean and cracked like sugar candy. You're probably not surprised to hear this, but Earth is a little obsessed with turning big things into tiny ones. Mountains to pebbles, boulders to dust. Even our bones one day will join that reductionist project. There's a strange comfort in it, the idea that everything gets ground down, softened by time, recycled into something else. Here's a fun, if mildly unsettling fact. In the right desert, sand can actually eat things. Not like a monster movie, but close enough. Structures get swallowed. Roads vanish. Entire towns can be erased from the map, simply because the wind decides to nudge a few billion grains in the same direction for a few decades. You might want to remember that next time you complain about vacuuming your hallway. And yet, for all its destructive tendencies, sand also preserves. Skeletons, tools, shipwrecks, entombed beneath shifting layers, hidden from sun and scavenger alike. It's the paradox of sand. It erodes the world, but it also holds onto pieces of it like a hoarder with good taste. As you continue walking, you notice a few darker grains mixed into the pale landscape. Magnetite maybe, or obsidian flakes. You lean closer. Some sparkle faintly. Others look dull but feel sharp to the touch. Each one has a different parent rock, a different journey. There's a particularly striking red grain you pick up and turn over in your palm. It's probably garnet, common in metamorphic rocks. Once buried under immense pressure, it was squeezed into form like coal into diamonds, only slightly less glamorous. And now, it's a speck on your fingertip. What a fall from grace. Quirky side note: in certain Renaissance paintings, artists actually used finely ground garnet mixed into paint to achieve a rich, crimson hue. Yep, your grain of sand might have once been art before it got demoted to foot-level furniture. A gentle rustling sound distracts you. A small lizard skitters past, barely leaving a mark. You watch as it vanishes under the curve of another dune. This landscape isn't dead, far from it. The creatures here have adapted to a world where the floor is always shifting. You look back the way you came, but the footprints are already gone, erased. Sand is the ultimate editor. It revises your presence, redrafts your path, and says, thanks, but no. Nothing here lasts, but also everything here lingers somehow, buried, reborn. Just beneath the surface, there could be pollen trapped from an ice-age summer, or a fleck of meteorite dust that's older than Earth itself. A single spoonful of sand might contain particles from 5 different continents. Globalization, long before ships and Wi-Fi. Historians still debate whether early sand usage in tools and construction contributed more to progress or collapse. Yes, sand helped build the first brick structures, but extracting it in excess may have destabilized river systems and early farmlands. As usual, humanity's favorite pastime: short-term gain, long-term side effects. You take another step and the slope beneath your feet subtly slides. A whisper, a warning, nothing dramatic, just the land reminding you that nothing here stays where you put it. Even the hills have trust issues. Far ahead, the horizon seems to shimmer. Heat, maybe, or a mirage. It's the kind of thing that made early explorers question reality, chasing phantom oases, only to find more sand, more silence, and sometimes themselves. So here you are in a world sculpted not by hands but by time. Pulverized stone, crushed memory. You run your fingers through it again and it sighs. You keep moving, the sand now cooler beneath your soles as the night stretches out ahead, and the landscape tilts subtly under the weight of ancient stories. Each grain beneath you, sharp, round, fractured, fused, began its journey in one of Earth's chaotic birthplaces. A crumbling cliff, a grinding riverbed, a simmering volcanic vent. But some grains took a more exotic route. You veer toward a new slope now, one rimmed by glassy fragments and blackened ridges that almost glow in the starlight. This is no ordinary patch of desert. This is the graveyard of forgotten beaches, of rivers that once sang across continents, of volcanoes that coughed up mountains only to watch them melt away into powder. You kneel and sift through the terrain, and suddenly you're in the presence of three elemental forces: volcanoes, rivers, and the long-lost memory of ocean shores. You reach for a glint of obsidian glass, volcanic sand. It's dark, dense, and still somehow sharp. It comes from magma that cooled too fast to form crystals, making it smoother in composition and dangerous in attitude. When volcanoes erupt, they don't just spatter molten rock, they shred it. Lava that meets water can shatter into microscopic pieces, creating the jet-black beaches of places like Hawaii, Iceland, and the Canary Islands. Tourists think these beaches are picturesque. Their feet say otherwise. You move on, tracing the faint suggestion of an ancient river channel. Here the sand shifts under you more smoothly, finer in texture. These grains were once part of highland stones, shattered by the persistent scrape of water. Rivers, those dramatic meanderers, chew away at stone like a toddler with a crayon, aggressively and with no respect for permanence. The particles they carry can travel hundreds, even thousands of miles before settling into deltas, floodplains, or being gulped down by the sea. Some of the grains here have rounded edges, like pebbles that lost their sharpness from the long tumble. You roll one between your fingers, imagining its path, from alpine ridge, down stream-cut gorges, over waterfalls, through muddy bends, past submerged trees and crocodile-infested shallows, possibly through the hands of some Bronze Age farmer washing their tools in the current, and then onward, toward a delta that may no longer exist. Historians still argue whether the shifting of river courses, like the Nile's ancient bends or the Indus River's dramatic rewrites, was caused more by natural siltation or human intervention. Either way, it meant entire cities found themselves landlocked or flooded, depending on the sand's mood. Eventually, the river delivers its cargo to the sea, but not all sand stays at the bottom. Some get swept along the coastline, rolled and re-rolled by tides, becoming what we know as beach sand. Now here's the kicker. The beaches you sunbathe on today are often built from particles that began their journey thousands of years ago, somewhere far inland, in a completely different climate. You step closer to a strip of sand that still carries hints of seashell, calcium fragments crunching faintly as you tread. This is sand born of ocean life, coral, mollusk shells, and urchin spines. When these creatures die, their skeletal remains break down and blend with mineral sands. This is particularly true of tropical beaches, where the soft pink or white sand you admire was once a living reef. Quirky tidbit incoming. In the Maldives and some parts of the Caribbean, a fish called the parrotfish plays a bizarre role in beach formation. It bites chunks off coral reefs, digests the edible parts, and excretes the rest as sand. Yep, that beach you love might be recycled fish poop. Glamorous, isn't it? But don't worry, it's exceptionally clean, well-processed fish poop, sterilized by time and sun and a whole lot of tumbling. You glance at the dunes around you now, wondering how many of these grains have passed through a digestive system. You decide not to ask them. You find a fossil embedded in a lump of cemented sand, a leaf print delicate and ghostly. It suggests a time when this place wasn't dry and arid but lush and swampy, perhaps even coastal. Earth's geography shifts so frequently in geologic terms that sand often ends up far from its point of origin. Whole beaches have been pushed inland by tectonic uplift. River valleys filled in by sediment become plains. Ocean floors become deserts. Historians still argue whether Atlantis was real or just an overcooked metaphor, but many believe its legend may be rooted in the fact that shorelines and islands do vanish. Earth reshapes its contours constantly, and sand is the brush it uses. You turn your attention now to the ancient seabeds, long since exposed. Underfoot, there's a certain kind of grit too fine to be dune sand, too heavy for wind alone to carry. This is marine sediment. It holds crushed shell, plankton skeletons, trace minerals from underwater volcanoes, and sometimes microplastic. Because of course it does. Sand remembers all its homes, volcanic slopes, river banks, coral reefs, and seabeds. Each one leaves a fingerprint on the particles, their shape, their composition, even their temperature sensitivity. Some grains carry magnetic qualities. Others glow faintly under UV light. If you had the right equipment, you could probably guess a grain's birthplace just by looking at its crystal structure. But for now, you just close your fist around a pinch of it. So many origins in something so small. There's a kind of quiet respect that creeps in when you realize how long sand's journey has been. The rock that became powder, the cliff that became castle filler, the fossil that became playground grit. It's not just dirt, it's a travel memoir. You pause near what might have once been a shoreline, now dry, cracked, and gently dissolving into desert. You can almost hear the waves even though they're gone. That's the illusion of sand. It carries echoes of oceans, of rivers, of eruptions. It drapes them all around you like a weighted blanket filled with time. And still you walk on, past ancient lava, past dry deltas, past forgotten beaches that no longer kiss the sea, all of it crushed and carried, all of it sculpted by time. You run your fingers along the gritty slope of the next dune, and as the grains tumble away, a strange uniformity catches your eye. Not in color. There's still the usual mix of beige, rust, and smoky grays, but in composition. You pick up a handful and let it stream between your fingers. The grains glitter in the starlight, angular and clear like shards of tiny glass. Quartz everywhere. You're surrounded by the most persistent mineral in the sandbox. Quartz, formerly known as silicon dioxide, is sand's most common ingredient, and with good reason. It's harder than steel in some cases, chemically stable, and just fussy enough that it doesn't dissolve easily in water. Quartz is the clingy friend of the mineral world. It shows up uninvited, stays for centuries, and somehow becomes the life of the party. As you examine a single grain more closely, it's easy to forget that this humble speck might be older than the continent you're standing on. Many grains of quartz in desert sand have been recycled through multiple rock formations. They were part of a granite mountain, then crushed into sediment, then compressed into sandstone, then uplifted and weathered out again. It's the mineral equivalent of a sitcom character who keeps reappearing in different roles every season. Historians still argue whether ancient glassmakers in Mesopotamia understood the unique properties of quartz when they first melted sand into glass around 3000 BCE. Did they know quartz was the key ingredient? Or were they just playing with fire and luck? Either way, their discovery changed everything. You pause to consider just how much of your modern life is quietly built on the backs of quartz grains. The screen you're staring at, or maybe just listening through, relies on silica from quartz. Your glass windows, your fiber optic cables, even the microchips powering your phone, all thanks to this stubborn little mineral that refuses to break down. You sit again, letting the sand pool around your legs like water. The quartz grains are cool, crisp, and just sharp enough to be felt without being painful. If you were to look at them under a microscope, you'd see that most grains are angular, maybe slightly frosted, worn down but not rounded like beach sand. That's because wind-blown desert sand doesn't get the constant, smoothing pressure of water. It's more like exfoliation via chaos. These wind-shaped grains also tend to sort themselves out. Lighter particles fly farther, heavier ones settle fast. Over time, dunes organize themselves by size and density, creating patches that are suspiciously well-behaved. Almost like the grains are attending a very strict boarding school. One quirky detail: quartz isn't the only sand-forming mineral out there, but it is by far the most prolific. Feldspar, magnetite, olivine, and even gypsum join the party sometimes, but none of them stick around as well as quartz. It's the last one standing after every storm, every flood, every 1,000-year-old landslide. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you remember that quartz is piezoelectric. That is, when it's compressed, it generates a small electrical charge. This odd trait has made it incredibly useful in everything from watches to medical equipment. But here, in the still desert air, the only electricity is the soft static on your fingertips from the dry wind, and the low buzz of the universe being very, very old. You wonder idly if you could find the oldest grain here, the one that's been through it all, supercontinents breaking apart, glaciers melting, dinosaurs stomping overhead. You imagine interviewing that grain. "Tell me everything," you whisper, and it would probably say something like, "I've been buried alive 17 times and I still look fabulous." There's something funny about it too, how quartz, for all its endurance, is transparent, practically invisible unless it catches the light just right. Humanity's most trusted material is basically a ghost. You push a few grains into a tiny pile, then flatten it with your palm. A crude experiment. Even in this childlike gesture, there's a whisper of ancient science. Early civilizations used sand to smooth wood, to filter water, to grind grain. Before metal tools, there was friction, and quartz was the gritty backbone of progress. Historians still debate whether the early use of sand in tool making was discovered accidentally or through some proto-scientific experimentation. Did someone spill grain into a rough stone bowl and realize it ground smoother with a little added sand? Or was it trial and error, refined over hundreds of generations? Either way, the result was civilization-level advancement, courtesy of some strategically applied scratchiness. You stand again, brushing the quartz grains from your legs, and they cling, of course they do. Quartz isn't magnetic, but it holds on with static and shape, wedging into every crease of clothing and skin. That's why it's so hard to leave the beach without taking half of it with you. Sand follows. It always follows. As you crest the next rise, the air shifts slightly, drier, cooler. The stars overhead are brilliant now, and the ground sparkles faintly like you're walking on powdered crystal. In a way, you are. A gentle breeze stirs, and the dune ahead begins to sing. Not loudly, just a soft whine, like wind over a bottle mouth. It's the friction between quartz grains, vibrating at just the right frequency. Scientists have spent decades trying to replicate and explain the phenomenon of singing dunes, and quartz's perfect hardness and uniform size seem to be key. You pause and press your ear close to the surface. It's like the sand is whispering a lullaby, one that predates language. Quartz also plays tricks on the light. As the sun rises in the distance, a faint glimmer appears across the dunes. Not a sheen, not exactly, more like a shimmer, the result of millions of tiny, translucent facets reflecting the dawn. It's no wonder ancient peoples associated deserts with mysticism. When the sand starts to glow, it feels like you're walking through a dream built by geometry. Back in the present, you step forward again. Quartz shifts beneath you, unwilling to be pinned down. It rolls and resists, always reminding you that it is not soil. It doesn't absorb. It doesn't anchor. It moves. It doesn't care what you want from it. And still, humanity keeps coming back, mining quartz for silicon, melting it into glass, turning it into timepieces, touchscreens, even telescopes. We owe much of our modern world to this tiny, transparent rebel. It's ironic, really. The thing we walk on without thinking is the same thing we use to look beyond the stars. You pause once more and scoop up a final handful. It glints. It stings your palm slightly. It doesn't apologize. You let it fall, one grain at a time. Your feet slide down the next dune and you land in a patch of sand unlike the ones before it. At first glance, it's nothing special, just more grains. But when the moonlight hits it just right, you pause. This isn't the usual faded beige. There's a subtle blush to it, a pale pink hue. You scoop a handful, let it pool in your palm, and there it is again, a pastel softness like powdered rose quartz. You're in the middle of a natural art gallery. The dunes here aren't just made of quartz. They've been painted by the planet. You begin walking through this gradient terrain, marveling at the variation. From honey gold crests to charcoal flanks to entire patches that are startlingly red. Sand, it turns out, is never just one color. It's a mosaic of mineral origins, environmental accidents, and biological contributions. Yes, even color has a backstory here. You reach a streak of almost black sand, and it crunches differently beneath your feet, heavier, coarser, likely rich in magnetite or basalt fragments, born from volcanic chaos. Black sand beaches like those in Hawaii and Iceland owe their hue to freshly cooled lava shattered by waves or wind. Here, miles from any coastline, it suggests that ancient volcanic flows once carved their way through this region before being buried and forgotten. Then there's the pink sand, gentle and strange. It reminds you of those picture-perfect shores in the Bahamas or Bermuda. That distinctive color often comes from microscopic shells of marine organisms called foraminifera, which have reddish-pink calcium carbonate exoskeletons. Over time, the waves pulverize them, blending their remains into the quartz sands. Beautiful, morbid, but mostly beautiful. And of course, there's the rust-red stuff. Hematite is the usual suspect, an iron oxide that tints sand anything from blood orange to deep crimson. You're standing in a place where the sand looks like it's been kissed by Mars. No wonder this mineral-rich coloring often shows up in spiritual myths and apocalyptic novels. When the ground itself starts turning red, people get twitchy. Historians still argue whether the ancient peoples who painted in ochre, from Aboriginal Australians to Paleolithic cave artists in Spain, used naturally tinted sands, or if they learned to separate pigments from the base grains. Either way, colored sand was more than art. It was ritual, language before writing, memory before alphabets. You crouch and rub a pinch of sand between your fingers, watching the red smear across your skin. A natural dye. It clings faintly like war paint or blush, depending on your vibe. Now here's a quirky little tidbit. There's a beach in California called Pfeiffer Beach where the sand turns a shimmering purple at certain times of year. The color comes from manganese garnet eroding out of nearby hillsides. It's not evenly distributed, so you'll be walking across pale beige one moment, then bam, lavender glitter, like someone spilled unicorn dust. Nature's mood ring. Back in your desert, you notice more subtle tones now. A stripe of pale green, likely olivine, sometimes called peridot when it's gem quality. It weathers quickly though, so finding it here means the source rock isn't too far away. You squint toward a distant ridge, wondering which forgotten mountain donated its sparkles to this sandbank. It's strange, isn't it? How something as small and forgettable as sand can carry such vivid pigment stories. You expected variety in pebbles or gemstones, but sand. It's like walking through a powdered museum. And it's not just minerals. Sometimes color comes from the strangest places. In deserts like the Namib or Atacama, certain sands get their hue from biological crusts, cyanobacteria and other microbes living right beneath the surface. They're part of fragile ecosystems, often invisible, but they give the soil a weird bluish or even green tint. Don't step too hard. You might crush an entire civilization you can't even see. You wander through another patch, this one golden, almost buttery. Classic quartz and feldspar blend, probably eroded from granite. You run your fingers through it, and the softness surprises you. These grains have been through enough tumbles to round off the harsh edges. Beach sand soft. That buttery texture you dream of when you think about tropical vacations and overpriced resort brochures. And then there are white sands, bright, blinding, almost surreal. You remember stories of White Sands National Park in New Mexico, where the dunes aren't made of quartz at all but gypsum. Unlike quartz sand, gypsum doesn't absorb heat well, so the dunes stay cool to the touch even in midday sun. Which sounds great until you realize gypsum dissolves in water, so rain would wash it away completely. Luckily, the area is dry enough to preserve them, at least for now. Historians still debate whether certain pale desert sites were chosen as sacred spaces precisely because of their eerie white sands. Did the ancient shamans associate brightness with divine favor? Or was it just a convenient, empty backdrop for rituals? The sand isn't talking. You keep walking and the color shifts under your feet again. The desert plays tricks like that. You think it's just sand, then suddenly the whole landscape changes hue like a chameleon, like someone adjusted the tint slider on reality. It makes you wonder, is color in sand purely cosmetic, or does it change the way the land behaves? Turns out it kind of does. Darker sands absorb more heat, making the surface temperature rise significantly, sometimes dangerously so. Lighter sands reflect more sunlight, which keeps things cooler. This has real consequences, especially in agriculture, construction, and even military strategy. In World War II, soldiers were trained to recognize hot zones by sand color alone. Bright white dunes might feel heavenly, but they often hid mirages and confused compasses. Color also affects how sand moves. Heavier mineral sands like garnet or magnetite don't blow around as easily. Lighter quartz-based grains travel farther and build taller dunes. It's a dance of density and momentum, played out grain by grain. You pause to take it all in, this quiet canvas of crushed time, each patch whispering its own origin story. You wonder if somewhere out there there's a dune striped like a tiger, orange from iron, black from basalt, white from shell, purple from garnet. Probably. Earth loves a good pattern. You lean down one last time, pressing your hand into a multicolored slope. The grains stick to your skin like confetti from a party you didn't know you attended. Sand may be tiny, it may be stubborn, but it never shows up plain. A sudden flicker of light catches your eye. Just ahead, on the far side of the dune, something jagged and glassy juts from the sand. You step closer, careful not to sink into the softer slope. It's half buried but unmistakably alien in shape. Not stone, not metal. It glints in the moonlight with a sheen too smooth, too slick. You brush away the covering sand and find what looks like a frozen bolt of lightning, hollow, branch-like, a tubular web of glass fused into the earth itself. You've just found a fulgurite. You reach out and touch the strange formation, its surface surprisingly cool despite its explosive origin. A fulgurite forms when lightning strikes dry, sandy ground in the heat, upwards of 30,000 Kelvin, hotter than the surface of the sun, instantly fuses the silica in the sand into glass. The bolt carves down through the ground like a fiery root, melting and transforming everything in its path. It's one of nature's most dramatic accidents. A single second of violence, preserved in sculpture. Historians still argue whether ancient desert cultures recognized fulgurites as supernatural relics or simply oddities. Some folklore holds them as petrified lightning, the crystallized anger of the gods. Others believe they were tools left by thunder spirits. Honestly, you get it. They do look like something Thor might have misplaced. You pick it up carefully, fragile yet sharp-edged, and peer through one of the hollow branches. Inside, the walls are smooth, almost glazed. Outside, they're rough, frosted by sand and exposure. It's like lightning made a cast of itself in the blink of an eye. And somehow that cast survived, tucked away beneath these dunes. You sit beside the strike site, imagining the storm that birthed this thing. Dry thunderheads towering in the distance, static crawling across the sky, the first bolt cracking down onto this empty land. And then, silence, heat, glass. It's not the only way sand becomes something more. Just to your left, a faint green gleam pokes out from the sand, smaller, more translucent. You dig gently and find a chunk of natural glass, but not from lightning. This one's older. Likely obsidian volcanic glass formed when lava cools so quickly that crystals don't have time to form. It's nature's shortcut. Instead of growing into neat structures, the atoms just freeze mid-chaos, trapped in a shapeless, glassy matrix. Obsidian blades have been found dating back to the Stone Age, their edges so sharp they rival modern surgical steel. One fringe study even looked into using obsidian scalpels for delicate surgeries. Imagine that, cutting-edge medicine, quite literally. And yet, while volcanic glass is useful, it's the humble beach or desert sand that gives us modern glass. You glance at a shallow metal bowl half buried nearby, clearly out of place, maybe lost by a traveler or tossed aside years ago. You dump out the sand inside and think about what would happen if you added intense heat, like really intense, say around 1,700 degrees Celsius. If you kept it there long enough, that sand would start to melt. It would bubble and deform and eventually become a viscous liquid, molten silica. That's the foundation of every pane of glass you've ever looked through, just melted sand. Humans have been making glass from sand for over 4,000 years. The earliest examples found in Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt were small beads and decorative items, more art than function. But as furnaces improved, so did technique. Windows, drinking vessels, mirrors, lenses, all from sand that got a little too hot. Historians still debate whether the invention of transparent glass was accidental. Perhaps some potter left a fire burning too long near a silicatrich pile, or if it was the result of careful experimentation. Either way, once we had clear glass, we never looked back. You tilt the bowl, imagining molten sand sloshing inside. Viscous, glowing, deadly to touch but gorgeous once cooled. The irony isn't lost on you. The same substance that clogs your shoes and chafes your socks also gives us telescopes, skyscrapers, and every screen in your life. The same grains that whisper beneath your feet can, when heated properly, become lenses that let us see galaxies. Glass is sand's second life, the glam glow-up, the after picture. But it's not always about fire. In places like the Libyan desert, you can find pale green chunks of a mysterious glass, Libyan desert glass, scattered across the sand. These pieces weren't formed by volcanoes or ancient furnaces. Most scientists believe they're the result of a meteor impact, or rather, a near miss. A superheated airburst that flash melted the surface sand, turning it to glass in seconds. You're looking at the geological version of an air fryer disaster. And yes, King Tut's dagger was made from that very glass. Carved, polished, and placed among his burial treasures, it was likely seen as a stone from the gods, probably because it was. You rub a finger along the fulgurite again, now understanding it not just as a freak occurrence but as a bridge between earth and sky, sand and time. Even the glass we make isn't entirely predictable. The atoms in glass don't align into neat crystals. They just sort of freeze in place. That means, structurally, glass isn't a solid. It's not a liquid either. It's an amorphous solid, an awkward in-betweener, much like sand itself. Another little-known fact: glass can absorb radioactive particles. In nuclear waste disposal, one of the best ways to trap harmful isotopes is to melt them into glass, a process called vitrification. So sand isn't just for building and beautifying. It might help save us from ourselves. You stare out over the desert again, this time seeing not dunes but archives, shelves of potential, libraries of untapped structure. All it takes is the right temperature. Wind kicks up a fine mist of grains and you close your eyes. You imagine them fusing midair, forming delicate threads of glass like spun sugar. Impossible, of course, but the idea lingers. Sand is nothing if not adaptable. Ground into concrete, poured into molds, blown into bulbs, caught in the slipstream of lightning. You look again at the fulgurite beside you. One flash, one impossible moment, and now glass roots in the earth. The silence returns. The sand cools. But somewhere beneath your feet, the memory of heat still hums. You move on, leaving the glassy lightning fossil behind as the dunes begin to flatten out, leveling into a wide plain under a sky still dripping with stars. The air is heavy now, still and salt-tanged. You breathe in deeply and realize that the wind no longer tastes of dust, but of the sea. You haven't seen it yet, but you know. You're standing on what used to be an ocean floor. There's no tide here anymore, but the sand remembers. You feel it underfoot, cooler, finer, less restless than the desert's wind-blown grit. This sand is quieter. It doesn't sing or shift. It simply lies in wait, the residue of a seabed that vanished eons ago. You're walking on a fossilized shoreline. And it's here more than anywhere. That sand tells its oldest stories. You crouch and draw your hand across the surface. The grains are finer, more rounded, smoothed not by wind but by water. Each one has been worn down by endless wave action, rushed forward, dragged back again and again over centuries. A slow, rhythmic polishing. No wonder it feels like silk compared to the coarse angles of desert sand. The sea, unlike the wind, is a gentle sculptor. Historians still argue whether the sand under your feet once fringed an ancient inland sea or a vast ocean that swallowed whole landmasses long before the continents settled into their current drama. Fossils found nearby, sharks, teeth, mollusk shells, even the imprint of a trilobite, suggest this region was once underwater, long before humans turned up asking where the nearest snack bar was. You start walking again, and in the stillness you imagine the ocean's voice, not roaring but breathing, the hush 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 of it, the kind of sound that never really stops, even when the water leaves. You step over a ripple pattern in the sand, fossilized now but unmistakable, the frozen memory of currents. You lean closer. These little ridges are known as ripple marks, and they're the ancient equivalents of a seafloor fingerprint. They form as water pushes sediment along in repetitive patterns, small waves in the sand mirroring the larger ones above. Now solidified by time, they're a snapshot of movement in a world that no longer moves. And the colors here are different too, bluer, grayer, sometimes tinged with a ghostly white, likely from crushed shells and calcium deposits. You find fragments beneath the surface, small, spiraled pieces of exoskeleton like coiled lace, once homes for snails, now crumbled into powder. These aren't just minerals, they're the architectural leftovers of life. Quirky tidbit: some of the softest sands in the world, like those on the Florida Panhandle or Bermuda, are almost entirely made of crushed shell. They're cool underfoot and squeak when you walk on them. Seriously, walk barefoot down Siesta Key and you'll sound like a very polite mouse. It's due to the shape of the grains and the friction between them. Science says so. Florida tourists just assume it's magic. You step into a slight depression and the ground changes again, looser, more chaotic. You're on what would have been a marine delta, where rivers once fed the sea, dumping sediment and nutrients into swirling estuaries. These transitional zones were messy, muddy, and full of life. The sand here is more mixed: silts, clays, even tiny flecks of plant matter fossilized in place. Historians still debate whether early civilizations understood the shifting nature of deltas when they built their cities there. The Nile Delta, the Tigris-Euphrates floodplain, the mouth of the Indus, all powerful cradles of culture built on the backs of restless sediment. And while they provided life, they also demanded sacrifice: floods, collapses, sinkings. Building on sand, as it turns out, was always a risky business. You pause, digging into a small mound, and your fingers hit something hard. Not a rock, a fragment of shell. You pull it free. It's intact enough to recognize an ancient bivalve. Its edges have worn smooth, its ridges faint, a ghost of a clam. It makes you wonder how many lives are buried beneath you. Not just shells and crabs and fish bones, but perhaps boats, tools, messages carved into driftwood. Because seas bury things, not out of cruelty, but because that's what they do. And in doing so, they preserve. Sand on the seafloor becomes a time capsule, catching and covering everything that falls into it. Old shipwrecks, swallowed cities, lost jewelry, and yes, sometimes human remains, all layered like geological lasagna beneath the calm surface. You stand, brushing the sand off your hands, and realize you're probably standing on top of history, or at least mystery. And not all seafloor sands are passive. Some become rock, lithified into sandstone, compressed over millions of years. What once shifted with every tide becomes permanent. And inside these rocks, the record of the ocean's mood swings. Fossils, ripple marks, burrows, and sometimes bizarre spherical structures called concretions, which form around a nucleus, maybe a bone, maybe a leaf, maybe a prank played by chemistry. A quick aside: in Kansas, people have found spherical rocks the size of pumpkins in ancient seafloor sandstones. Some look like cannonballs. Others have been split open to reveal glittering crystal interiors. Scientists are still puzzling out the exact process that creates them. Meanwhile, locals continue to name them things like devil's marbles and earth eggs, which honestly sound like items in a wizard's pantry. You crest a low rise and suddenly see patterns carved into the ground, not from nature but ancient tools. Straight lines cross hatchings. You're looking at a seabed turned floor turned foundation. Some lost people once built structures here before the sea reclaimed them and the sand fossilized the evidence. Maybe a fish drying rack, maybe a ritual platform. Now, just scars in the stone. You crouch and press your palm into one of the grooves. It's warm from the sun even after nightfall. You wonder who last stood here, how long ago, how different the world was. And then you realize the answer is both comforting and chilling. Very, and not at all. Because even now, even under dry sky and empty air, you're still walking through the ocean's memory. Sand doesn't forget. Not the push of the tide, not the bite of barnacles, not the silt of ancient floods, and especially not the brief flicker of human effort etched in its surface before being swallowed again. You step back onto loose sediment, your trail filling in behind you. No one will see where you've walked, but the sand knows. It always knows. You wander farther across the old seabed, the terrain shifting again beneath your steps, this time from stillness to subtle motion. The grains here don't just sit quietly. They're busy. They've been sculpted, borrowed, stacked, rolled, and borrowed again by forces far smaller and sneakier than the ocean ever was. You kneel, and from this lower view, the surface tells a very different story. Tiny mounds, perfect circles, intricate spirals etched into the sand like invitations. Something lives here, something clever. The sand isn't just shaped by water and wind. It's built with, designed, engineered by creatures who see these grains not as debris but as bricks, camouflage, or traps. You crouch beside one such structure, a neat, funnel-shaped pit dug into the sand. You recognize it instantly, maybe from documentaries or your own unfortunate childhood ant farm experiments. It's the signature work of the antlion larva, better known as the doodlebug. These tiny insects build death traps in soft sand, then bury themselves at the bottom, jaws open, waiting for some unsuspecting ant to fall in. It's a bit of nightmare architecture, really. A pit that collapses if you resist. The more a prey item struggles, the faster the sand gives way beneath its feet. And right at the bottom, those waiting jaws sleep tight. Quirky side note, the design is mathematically precise. Antlion pits exploit granular physics to perfection, using sand's natural angle of repose to make collapse unavoidable. If this creature were any better at engineering, we'd be hearing it to build parking garages. You move on, noticing more signs of small construction. Little pellet mounds, twisty tubes, shimmering sheets across the surface that look like wet plastic but are actually just densely packed sand granules held together by saliva, slime, or secretions you definitely don't want to investigate further. Marine worms like the lugworm have been shaping sand for millions of years. They churn through it, swallowing grains to digest the microscopic biofilm that coats each one. The sand comes out the other end in little spaghetti-shaped coils, often mistaken for strange sea snails. It's not glamorous, but it's how many coastal ecosystems breathe. You find a dried cast of one such coil nearby, still intact. You poke it. It crumbles like overbaked pastry, beautiful, fleeting, and very weird. Farther along, you reach an old tidal pool depression, now dry but littered with the remains of tubeworm colonies. These creatures once anchored themselves in the sand, building narrow towers out of sticky mucus and mineral bits. The result? Fragile, chimney-like structures that resemble something halfway between coral and cake frosting. Historians still debate whether early humans understood the biological richness of sand flats or merely saw them as unpleasant terrain. Evidence suggests ancient coastal dwellers harvested clams and sandworms extensively, but whether they recognized their role in sediment turnover is unknown. What we do know, Life in the sand shaped food systems long before farming did. You pause to look out over the plain again and spot what looks like a tiny dome, no bigger than a melon. You move closer. It's a sand bubbler crab sculpture. This little crustacean spends its mornings filtering organic material from sand, forming hundreds of pea-sized balls and placing them in mesmerizing spirals across the beach. The result looks like an abstract map or a temporary galaxy drawn in miniature. It's pure art, though the crab doesn't care. It's just breakfast leftovers, really. Of course, by midday, the tide comes in and erases it all. Every crab spiral, every worm cast, every doodlebug pit, gone, and then rebuilt again the next day. You start to sense a theme here. Sand offers impermanence, but within that it offers space, for design, for memory, for biological graffiti. You step into a patch where larger creatures have been at work. There are burrow holes here, big enough to fit your fist into, likely home to ghost crabs or maybe even small mammals if the terrain is right. You peek inside one and catch a glint of movement. Something backs away silently. Fair enough. You wouldn't want a stranger reaching into your hallway either. And it's not just burrows. Some animals actually glue the sand together. Take the caddisfly larva, for instance. Found near freshwater streams, it gathers grains and sticks them into portable cases using silk secreted from glands near its mouth. The result? Mobile sand cocoons. The caddisfly drags its sandy armor around like a hermit crab with very low design standards. Artists have even harvested these creatures and given them access to gold flakes and jewels to see what they'll build. Turns out, their taste improves drastically with better materials. Can't say we're so different. Here's another oddity: fish that build sand mandalas. In the coastal waters off Japan, male pufferfish create elaborate circular sand patterns on the seafloor to attract mates. We're talking precise geometry, radiating spokes, sculpted ridges, all constructed using their fins and a lot of patience. Once complete, the pattern isn't just beautiful. It channels currents to bring fine sand particles toward the center, making it softer for eggs. Functional and fabulous. You can almost picture the little pufferfish finishing the last ridge, stepping back like a proud architect with his fins on his hips, waiting for someone to swoon. And if no female shows up, he scrapes it all away and starts again. Brutal. You sit in the middle of this living sandbox, realizing that you're surrounded by engineers, designers, artists, and murderers. And none of them are human. Sand is their medium, their building block, their notebook. And just like our sandcastles or desert cities, their creations are temporary. But that doesn't make them meaningless. Historians still argue whether certain ancient coastal patterns discovered in fossilized sediment were made by natural forces or living creatures. Some of the oldest known artifacts may simply be ancient worm tracks, biology masquerading as culture. But even that distinction starts to blur. After all, if a worm shapes the sand to survive, and a human shapes it to tell a story, aren't both, in some way, sculpting truth? You brush your hands along the surface again. You find a near-perfect circle made of small stones, likely assembled by a bird, maybe a plover, nesting directly on the sand. No twigs, no branches, just stone, instinct, and sunlight. It's quiet here, not dead, just busy in a smaller frequency. The sand wriggles, shifts, bubbles, builds. You're not alone. You wake to a sudden whisper in the air, not a voice, not exactly, more like a breath, a hush with weight behind it. You squint toward the horizon and there it is, a faint, rising wall of motion. At first it looks like smoke, then fog, but it moves too fast and it's too dry, a sandstorm. You don't run. That would be pointless. Besides, this is a sleepy science journey, and we're not about to panic over some airborne exfoliation. You pull your scarf up over your mouth, turn your back to the wind, and wait. It arrives in layers. First, a hiss as loose surface grains are pulled upward in tiny spirals. Then comes the wave, billions of particles rushing forward, lifting, tumbling, colliding. The wind howls now, dragging curtains of sand across the ground, reshaping the very land beneath your feet. You can't see much anymore. Just the storm's insides, golden and gray, sharp with movement. The sky disappears. So does the sun. Welcome to one of Earth's most efficient sculptors, where visibility drops, skin stings, and entire dunes decide they'd like to relocate today. Thank you very much. Historians still argue whether ancient desert travelers deliberately timed their routes to avoid these storms, or simply accepted them as unavoidable. Caravans moved at night to avoid heat, but night doesn't always guarantee calm skies. What's clear? Sandstorms have been disrupting, reshaping, and erasing trails for as long as humans have dared cross deserts. The wind doesn't blow in one direction, it whips, it surges. This isn't a breeze gone rogue. This is chaos with choreography. You kneel, hands shielding your face, and observe the grains as they lift and fall. Each one doesn't fly in isolation. There's a dance to it. Saltation, where particles bounce in short arcs. Creep, where heavier grains are dragged across the surface. And suspension, where the tiniest specks stay aloft for miles, carried so high they drift into the upper atmosphere. You'd think something so small couldn't cause damage, but collectively, sand can scour paint off metal, blind pilots, strip crops, even change the course of history. During World War II, sandstorms in North Africa grounded aircraft, disabled tanks, and destroyed entire field operations. Napoleon's Egyptian campaign was nearly undone by the desert, not just the enemy. Sand doesn't take sides, it just moves. You remember stories of the Dust Bowl in 1930s America when poor farming practices collided with drought and wind. Plains once rich with crops turned into sand-blasted ruins. People choked. Cities darkened at noon. The land forgot how to breathe. And all from dust, loosened by plows, carried by wind, turned against its own makers. There's something unnervingly democratic about a sandstorm. It doesn't care who you are, what you're carrying, or how far you've come. It wipes out trails, erases borders, redraws the landscape, literally. You think of the term desertification, a slow-motion horror story playing out in places like the Sahel, where once green lands inch closer to desert every year. Overgrazing, deforestation, and climate change conspire to turn fertile soil into loose sand, ready to rise at the first gust. It's like watching a country vanish, one storm at a time. And it's not just local. You blink through the stinging wind and remember this weird, wonderful fact. Sand from the Sahara fertilizes the Amazon rainforest. Seriously, tiny particles, lifted into the sky, drift across the Atlantic Ocean and rain down over South America, bringing phosphorus and nutrients that tropical soils desperately need. It's an ancient, invisible trade route, a gift from one ecosystem to another. Quirky detail. Scientists track these particles using satellite imaging and high-altitude sampling. The numbers are staggering. Tens of millions of tons of African dust cross the ocean every year. So, in a very literal sense, the air you're breathing right now might include a grain from Timbuktu. You feel a sting as one of those grains taps your cheek, not from Africa probably, but just as determined. The storm peaks now. The noise is less a roar than a deep rumble, like the earth clearing its throat. And the dunes, they're on the move. Dunes aren't fixed. They migrate, slowly but with purpose. Wind pushes sand up the gentle slope, and when it can't hold anymore, the grains avalanche down the steep side. Repeat that a few thousand times and the entire dune shifts, sometimes meters per year. In some places, like China's Badain Jaran Desert, dunes hundreds of meters tall wander the landscape like sandy mountains on vacation. In Namibia, satellite images over decades show vast dune fields sliding inland. They're not stationary features, they're travelers. You think about ancient cities buried in sand, not by dramatic Pompeii-style eruptions, but by slow suffocation. Villages abandoned to storms, wells swallowed, roads erased. Archaeologists have unearthed entire marketplaces preserved beneath dunes, like someone dropped a curtain and forgot to lift it again. Historians still argue whether the collapse of certain North African trade hubs was due to economic decline or encroaching sand. Maybe both. In the end, does it matter? The result was the same: swallowed. But not all storms are disasters. Some creatures thrive in this chaos. The Saharan silver ant, for instance, moves through high heat and blasting winds with ease, using long legs and a reflective body to survive the brief window between deadly temperatures and death by being buried alive. Not to mention desert plants that trap grains with tiny barbs, slowly building their own private windbreaks. You wipe your face again and the wind begins to ease. The storm is passing. A strange silence settles over the land, the kind that comes only after something massive has moved through. The sun tries to peek through the dusty air, and your surroundings reveal themselves, subtly altered. Ridges shifted, tracks erased, a new ripple pattern sculpted in the sand nearby. You step forward and your footprint sinks deep. Within minutes, it will be gone. And yet somewhere, a camera might have captured this storm from space, a curling brown cloud arcing over continents. The sand you just inhaled might be halfway to a forest. The particles that just battered your face might someday become beach, concrete, or silicon chip. Sandstorms are reminders, not just of power but of connection. The dust in your lungs is the earth on the move. It has no map, no mercy, and no intention of stopping. But it also feeds jungles, travels oceans, and builds mountains one whisper at a time. So you breathe in, cough a little, because let's be real and press on. The storm is over. The sand is ready to move again. The air settles after the storm, and for a moment it feels like nothing has changed. But look closely, everything has. The path you took is gone. The small ridges that once etched the ground like fine wrinkles are smoothed over. And those dunes on the horizon, slightly reshaped, subtly rotated. Wind doesn't just howl and vanish. It rearranges the world while you're blinking dust out of your eyelashes. You begin walking again, this time along a firmer patch of ground. The sand here is compacted, unusually level. It feels constructed, and after a few steps you realize why. This isn't just natural terrain anymore. This is a foundation, man-made, or at least man-modified. Welcome to a place built on sand. It seems like a contradiction, doesn't it? We use built on sand as a metaphor for instability, for short-sightedness. But look around. Entire civilizations have done just that, literally. Babylon, Carthage, Venice. They rose not despite the sand, but because of it. Not every foundation has to be made of stone. Some just need enough cleverness and a lot of sweat. You imagine yourself in ancient Mesopotamia, sometime around 4000 BCE. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers spill their silt and sand across the floodplains, creating fertile ground. People begin stacking sun-dried bricks, made of mud and sand and a bit of straw, and before long cities rise. Ziggurats, temples, houses, walls. Not a skyscraper among them, but enough mass to inspire entire mythologies. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian architects deliberately engineered their cities to work with the softness of sand or simply worked around it, trial and error style. Either way, they made it work, until floods or war or shifting riverbeds made them not work anymore. You kneel and scrape at the surface. It's packed hard here, likely from centuries of trampling. Maybe carts, maybe sandals, maybe animals dragging supplies to a building site. The sand has been pressed into something more than itself. It's not quite concrete, but it remembers weight. Concrete, as it turns out, also owes a lot to sand. You glance around, half expecting to find a bag of Portland cement leaning on a rock, but no, just grains. The kind that are being extracted at astonishing rates worldwide. Because sand is the main ingredient in concrete, and modern civilization eats concrete like popcorn. Highways, skyscrapers, sidewalks, dams, airports, all of it built with sand. Here's the weird part: we're running out of the right kind. Quirky fact: desert sand, the kind blowing in your eyes earlier, is mostly useless for construction. It's too round, too smooth. It doesn't bind well. What concrete needs is angular sand, usually found in riverbeds and coastlines. And so the global demand for construction-grade sand has exploded into a full-blown extraction crisis. You look down again, imagining not just ancient builders but modern machines. Dredgers scooping up sand from river bottoms, conveyor belts whisking it toward concrete mixers, dump trucks humming through urban jungles. And somewhere, quietly watching, the rivers shrink, the deltas erode, the ecosystems tremble. It turns out that sand isn't an infinite resource. Shocking, right? For something we associate with everywhere, it's surprisingly specific in function. It has to be the right shape, size, and composition for certain jobs. And when those jobs are, say, build Dubai, you're going to need a lot of it. Dubai, by the way, imported most of its construction sand, despite being surrounded by desert. The irony is thicker than wet cement. Historians still debate whether our current sand consumption is more environmentally damaging than past deforestation or coal mining. It's hard to compare apples and tiny rocks, but some argue that our reliance on sand might be the next big ecological crisis hiding in plain sight, quite literally, beneath our feet. You move farther along the packed surface and find something half-buried, a shard of brick, old maybe, hand-formed. You brush it off and feel its weight, light, porous, sun-fired. This was made from sand and mud, a building block of someone's home, or shop, or temple. Then there's glass again, a broken piece dulled at the edge, peeking out from the grit. Could be medieval, could be modern. In either case, it's another reminder that sand doesn't just support buildings, it becomes them. And not just structures. Whole cities rely on sandbags for flood control. Military fortifications have been built with sand-filled barriers. Even the digital world, our internet, our cloud storage, our glowing screens, all powered by silica, purified and transformed into the chips that run the machines. You're probably surrounded by sand right now, even indoors. It's in the drywall, the floor tiles, the circuit boards, maybe even the paint. But back to the open air. The city that once stood here is long gone. Wind and time reclaimed it. You can see the faint impressions still, rectangle outlines, maybe foundations. Low ridges that suggest where walls might have stood. There's a sadness to it, sure, but also awe. You think of Petra, carved directly into the sandstone cliffs of Jordan. Or Timbuktu, its libraries and mosques shaped from sand, bricks, and clay. Or Machu Picchu, its dry stone walls fitted so precisely they've survived centuries of earthquakes. So much of history is held together by sand. And then there's Venice, floating on a forest of underwater timber, its buildings supported by sand and silt. It shouldn't work, but it does. Until, of course, rising seas start rewriting the ending. You find a small tile now buried at an angle, ceramic cracked, faded blue. You imagine the hand that placed it. Was it part of a bathhouse, a floor mosaic, a fountain's edge? It doesn't matter. What matters is this: it stayed even after the building didn't. Sand lets us build, but only on its terms. You turn back toward the distant ridges, footprints trailing behind you. The wind hasn't picked up yet, but you know it will, eventually. And when it does, these lines, these edges, these hints of what once was, will blur. Nothing built on sand lasts forever. But that doesn't mean it wasn't worth building. The wind dies again just briefly, and in the silence you hear a soft, rhythmic thumping, a mechanical heartbeat in the distance. You follow the sound, cresting another low rise until the shape comes into view. A cluster of machines, silent for the night, their scoops and conveyor belts frozen mid-motion under the moonlight. A sand processing site. Temporary, industrial, and already half swallowed by the dunes it's here to harvest. You approach slowly. It smells faintly of oil and heat even now. Tire tracks crisscross the ground. There's a loader, a few sand piles sorted by grain size, and a squat trailer with dusty windows. No guards, no fences. Nothing to suggest this is anything more than what it is, a place where sand becomes product. This is where it gets real. You're standing in the middle of one of the world's quietest, strangest obsessions, the global sand industry. We like to think of sand as background noise, as something cheap and infinite. But globally, we use over 50 billion metric tons of it every year. Not just for construction, though concrete is the biggest consumer, but for glassmaking, land reclamation, road surfacing, water filtration, fracking, and even cosmetics. If there's grit in your life somewhere, chances are it came from a place like this. You crouch next to a pile labeled 5 silica. Each grain is so uniform it looks manufactured, but it's not. It was chosen, sorted by size, washed, dried, refined. This sand is destined for industry, for someone's touchscreen, someone's eyeglasses, possibly even a satellite lens. Historians still argue whether the Industrial Revolution would have been possible without sand as a raw material. Sure, we talk about coal and steel, but sand was there too, quietly providing the moldings, the lenses, the bricks. It's always the quiet ones. Then there's the dark side. You walk past a tire half buried in the dune, cracked and sun-warped. There's a silence here that feels uneasy. That's because sand mining isn't always as calm as this place looks. In many parts of the world, it's a violent, unregulated business. You've probably heard whispers about the so-called sand mafias. Sounds ridiculous, right? Until you learn that in countries like India and Kenya, illegal sand mining has led to murders, disappearances, and environmental destruction so widespread that entire river ecosystems have collapsed. It makes sense in a grim way. Sand is in everything, and the right kind of sand, angular, coarse, construction grade, is becoming scarce. So when rivers dry up or beaches erode, there's big money on the table. More money than most people would ever expect from what's essentially just fancy dirt. And yet it's not dirt. You've seen that now. Sand is time crushed and carried. Sand is structure. Sand is memory. And it's valuable in a way most of us never bother to realize until it's gone. You pass a pile labeled reclaimed fill. This sand was probably pulled from a demolished building or dredged from a riverbank, sifted and cleaned for reuse. Even sand gets recycled. It's an odd reversal of its natural cycle. Humans breaking down buildings into sand again, after building those very buildings from sand in the first place. You wonder how many times a single grain could be used. Was it once part of a Roman aqueduct, a medieval glass window, a sidewalk in Tokyo, a mall in Johannesburg? Quirky aside, Singapore has imported so much sand for land reclamation projects that it's literally expanded its size by over 20% since 1960. Think about that. A nation building more nation out of sand. Not concrete, not steel, just the granular stuff people vacation on. But of course, that imported sand had to come from somewhere, and the consequences have been severe. In Cambodia, Vietnam, and Indonesia, entire beaches and riverbanks have vanished. Fishing economies collapsed. Communities flooded. All because someone needed more space, and sand was the way to get it. You pause next to one of the machines. It looks like a cross between a snowblower and a beast. Its intake is frozen mid-bite. In the daylight, it devours sand with steady rhythm, separating grains by size and purpose. It's not evil, just hungry. You think about your phone again, about how the glass on your screen was likely made from silica, that the microchip inside needed ultra-pure sand to exist. That sand is the foundation of all modern computing. Without sand, there's no tech, no towers, no touchscreens, no tick-tock. Historians still debate whether the shift from analog to digital made our dependence on sand more dangerous or more efficient. Sure, we use less paper, but now every phone, server, satellite, and sensor depends on hyper-refined sand products. In some ways, the world's most futuristic technology is built on the same stuff as a Bronze Age pot. You pick up a handful from the optical grade pile. It feels no different from the others, but this one's been refined down to purity levels of 99.9999%, ultra clear, no impurities, ready to become a fiber optic cable or a laser lens. It looks like powder. It holds global communication. You let it run through your fingers. It vanishes like smoke. And still, people underestimate it. Sand is treated like an afterthought, like an inconvenience when it gets into your shoes or your car mats. But without it, we're stranded, structurally, digitally, ecologically. Without sand, we don't just lose buildings, we lose the blueprint for how to live in them. You take one last glance at the processing site, now a skeleton in the moonlight. It will be running again tomorrow. Conveyor belts will hum, sand will move. Grains will be chosen for their shape, their origin, their potential. Some will be built into skyscrapers. Some will be turned into silicon wafers. Some, like those you've been walking on, will just sit, waiting, slowly eroding, quietly judging. And all of it still just sand. You leave the sand processing site behind as the first blush of dawn begins to lighten the sky. The stars are fading, replaced by a pale ribbon of gold stretching along the horizon. You walk in silence for a while, the sand whispering beneath your steps, and it hits you. This stuff, this tiny, gritty, persistent material, it runs the world. And people are starting to notice. You pass a dry riverbed, the sand cracked in places, smoothed in others. Someone has written a word in the surface with a stick, just 3 letters, no. You don't know what they were protesting, but you understand the sentiment. This isn't just geology anymore. It's politics, it's conflict, it's power. Because if you haven't figured it out yet, sand is a hot commodity, and whenever something becomes valuable, it becomes vulnerable. Welcome to the strange, shadowy world of the global sand trade. You crest a low ridge and look out over a valley where riverbanks once stood tall. Now they slump inward like someone's taken a giant spoon and carved them away. The water is still there, barely, but it moves sluggishly now, choked with sediment. It's what's left after years of illegal sand mining. You'd expect oil or gold to be trafficked, but sand, yes, more than you think. From the banks of the Mekong to the shores of Lake Victoria, sand is being stolen, dug by hand at night, hauled away in unmarked trucks, dredged by rogue boats under cover of darkness, all of it feeding the insatiable appetite of construction booms in countries far away. Historians still argue whether international treaties can ever truly regulate this invisible economy. The problem isn't just that sand is being taken, it's that nobody notices until it's too late. A river collapses, a village floods, a wetland vanishes, and by the time someone thinks to ask, where did it all go? Well, it's already part of a luxury hotel in Dubai. You crouch at the edge of the ruined riverbank and pick up a handful of the remaining sand. It's different here, heavier, more saturated, still clinging to the roots of plants that are trying to hold on. This isn't desert sand. This was once vibrant, fertile land. Now it's exposed, vulnerable. Illegal sand mining has grown into a multi-billion-dollar underground economy. In some regions, the sand mafias operate like full-blown cartels, with bribery, intimidation, and violence to protect their rights to a resource that, technically, belongs to everyone. Journalists who investigate the trade have disappeared. Activists have been threatened or worse, all over sand. Let that sink in. You pass the remains of a makeshift dock, wooden posts driven into the silt, now half-rotted, likely used to load sand onto small boats. You imagine it operating in the dark. No lights, just men with shovels. Maybe a motor that sputters once, then quiets. Quirky detail. In some areas of India, authorities have started using drones and satellites to monitor illegal sand mining from the air. It's like a high-tech game of whack-a-mole, except the mole owns several backhoes and knows the local police chief's favorite whiskey. Meanwhile, global demand keeps rising. Countries like China have used more concrete in the last 10 years than the US used in the entire 20th century. Think about that. All of it built with sand. The rate is so high, new sources are constantly needed. Some nations have even accused others of stealing their land via unauthorized dredging, sucking up offshore sands to build new islands or expand coastlines. You reach a bluff and look down at a shoreline that no longer exists. The beach has receded by several meters, not to erosion, not to storms, but to profit. You see faint tire tracks leading down to what used to be a cove. Now it's just a gaping scoop in the earth. And it's not just Asia or Africa. Even wealthy nations have run into sand conflicts. In Florida, entire beaches have been restored by shipping in sand from other states or offshore dredging. In the Netherlands, sand is imported and reshaped into artificial dunes as a barrier against rising seas. Historians still debate whether these efforts are sustainable or simply cosmetic, band-aids over a deeper, grittier wound. After all, when your coastline needs to be rebuilt every few years, is it still a coastline or just performance art? You walk farther inland, away from the shredded beach, and come across something unexpected, a protest sign half buried in the sand. The paint is faded but still readable. This is not nothing. You smile a little, because yes, exactly. Sand isn't just background, it's infrastructure, it's economy, it's power. And now, in some places, it's also theft. You imagine the future of sand, controlled mines with strict quotas, AI-monitored extraction, recycled glass being crushed and repurposed. Or perhaps an even darker vision, resource wars, black markets, smuggling routes, the commodification of every last grain. Because here's the truth no one likes to talk about. We can't replace it easily. Crushed rock, not the same, it lacks the structure, the texture, the behavior. Desert sand, too round. We're incredibly picky when it comes to the sand we'll tolerate in our concrete, and for all our technological advances, we've yet to invent a perfect substitute. You reach a section where someone tried to plant grass. A reclamation effort maybe, the soil's loose, the seedlings are struggling. Without structure, nothing holds. The wind picks up and a few stalks tremble. You wonder how long they'll last. And then you think of something else, the human toll. Sand mining often happens in places with little oversight. Workers labor in dangerous conditions, risking collapse, suffocation, even drowning. Children, in some cases, are involved. It's a gritty, invisible industry with a cost we rarely see. You brush your hand through the sand once more. This place is quiet now, but the conflict runs deep beneath your feet. Every grain here could be the beginning of something. A new building, a paved road, a silicon chip. Or it could be the end of something, a riverbank, a habitat, a village. You stand and look out over the landscape. No explosions, no sirens, just a slow, granular disappearance. This is what depletion looks like. Not dramatic, just dust by dust. You don't notice the beach at first, not until the ground beneath your feet starts to bounce, ever so slightly, soft and springy, like someone swapped the land for a mattress covered in powdered sugar. Then you hear it, waves, gentle and rhythmic, licking the shore with the same patience sand seems to admire in everything it touches. You're at the edge of the ocean now, finally. The dunes behind you slump like tired shoulders, and ahead of you stretches a flat expanse of damp, packed sand that glows silver under the early morning light. The tide's low. The water is quiet, and scattered along the shoreline like forgotten relics, there they are, sandcastles. Not the touristy kind, not sculpted sea dragons or 10-turret citadels made with plastic buckets and questionable ambition. These are smaller, more tentative. The kind built by someone who understood the tide was coming and did it anyway. You crouch beside one. It's no more than a short stack of towers, each one slightly sagging, one already cracked and crumbling at the base. A small trench circles the keep, filled now with murky seawater, as if the tiny kingdom had time to build its moat before abandoning ship. A tiny shell sits atop the central turret like a lone weather vane, turning slightly in the breeze. And somehow it's devastating, because sandcastles aren't built to last. And that's the point. You sit down, digging your fingers into the cold, damp sand. The grains here are different from the deserts, heavier, darker, and more willing to hold shape. Water makes the difference. When sand is wet, capillary bridges form between grains, allowing them to stick together. Its chemistry meets childhood. There's actually a perfect ratio for sandcastle building, about 1 part water to 8 parts sand. Too dry and the grains won't bind. Too wet and they collapse under their own weight. Get it right and you can build miniature empires. Historians still argue whether sandcastle making was purely a modern invention, or if ancient coastal dwellers also built temporary sand structures, perhaps for rituals, perhaps just for fun. In parts of South Asia, sand sculptures were, and still are, built as offerings during religious festivals, a fleeting form of devotion washed away by the sea. You pick up a handful of this wet sand and let it ooze through your fingers. It slumps like lazy dough, then forms into a soft pyramid as it lands. It's obedient, but not for long. A small wave creeps forward and kisses your ankle, then recedes, leaving a string of bubbles like punctuation. The water is inching higher. You look at the nearest castle again. One tower falls, the shell sliding down like a tiny exodus. No resistance, no sound, just the collapse of an idea. And somehow you don't feel sad. Not really. Because the beauty of a sandcastle isn't in how long it stands, it's in the fact that it was. A child's laughter echoes in your memory. Maybe yours, maybe someone else. You remember digging moats with plastic shovels, pouring bucket after bucket of seawater into a trench, yelling "no, not yet," as the tide advanced, as if you could command the ocean. But the ocean doesn't care, and sand knows that, which is probably why they get along so well. You glance around at the rest of the beach, other abandoned constructions, some more elaborate, one with driftwood flags, another shaped like a turtle. They're all being slowly, carefully unmade by the tide, not destroyed, unmade. The sea doesn't attack, it takes back. It's the perfect metaphor, isn't it? We build our lives, our routines, our homes, our plans on foundations as fragile as wet sand. And we do it anyway, not because we're foolish, but because we're hopeful. Because creating something beautiful, even for a moment, is worth the certainty of its end. There's a reason we return to beaches, not just for sun or salt, but for the quiet lesson they whisper with every wave. Everything is temporary, and that's okay. Quirky fact: the world's tallest sandcastle was over 69 feet tall, built in Denmark in 2021. It took a team of artists weeks to complete. And then, a storm rolled in. Within days, most of it was gone, but the photos remain, the experience remains, and maybe that's enough. You dig a little trench with your finger just for the satisfaction, then a small wall, then a crude square base. You press damp sand into shape, stack little towers with your palm. It's not elegant, but it's something. Another wave inches closer. You watch it arrive like a polite assassin. It touches the outer trench. It hesitates. Then, as if embarrassed, it recedes. You exhale, but you know what's coming. You sit and wait, toes buried in the cool sand, eyes on your fragile creation. And eventually the wave comes again, just a little stronger this time. It touches the base. The left tower slumps. The trench fills. You smile. Because this is the whole point. Sand teaches us about impermanence, about presence, about how to build knowing full well that the tide has other plans. Historians still argue whether sand was ever used as a teaching tool in ancient philosophy, whether sages pointed to the shifting shoreline and said, "There, that's life." But it doesn't really matter. The message delivers itself. You stand as another wave finishes the job. Your little fortress is gone now, reduced to a damp circle and a slightly firmer patch of ground. You press your foot into it, leaving one clean print. And then you walk away. The ocean smooths everything behind you. The wind quiets. The castle is gone. And still it mattered. You leave the shoreline behind as the tide reaches its lazy peak, climbing the beach like a sleepy cat. The sand underfoot becomes drier with each step until it returns to its old habits, sliding, sighing, and shifting beneath you. Soon, you find yourself once again among dunes. But these aren't still, not even close. These dunes are moving. Not fast, not in a way you can catch with your eyes, but they move all the same, inch by inch, year by year, pushing their way across the landscape like slow, silent beasts made entirely of memory. You pause at the base of one and look up. It rises like a frozen wave, graceful and deliberate, its crest sharp against the sky. It doesn't belong to this place, not really. It's just passing through. This is a Barkhan dune, named after the crescent shape it takes when the wind pushes sand in one dominant direction. The horns point downwind, curved like a smile or a warning. These dunes are like snowdrifts with ambition. They crawl across deserts, highways, fields, even into cities, burying everything too slow to move. Historians still argue whether certain ancient settlements were lost entirely to migrating dunes, or if the people abandoned them first. Either way, some towns simply vanished under layers of sand, their rooftops becoming bumps, their streets erased like a chalkboard wiped clean. You climb the side of the dune and slide a little, grains slipping under your boots with each step. The sand moves too, just enough to remind you it doesn't enjoy being still. At the top, the wind picks up, tugging at your clothes and tossing fine grit into your mouth. You taste the desert, dry, gritty, bitter. The view stretches out before you, an ocean of dunes rolling to the horizon, a place where the landscape is never finished. Dunes like these can migrate at rates of several meters per year. In the Sahara, some are so massive they can bury villages in a single generation. Others, like those in the Gobi Desert, move slower but with the same inevitable crawl. No matter where they form, they never stop. They don't need permission. They don't need roads. And while most dunes travel with the wind, some seem to have minds of their own. The booming dunes of China, for instance, shift in complex ways that defy simple wind logic. They collide, they merge, they split like sentient landmasses. Some scientists joke that dunes behave like organisms. You're not convinced they're wrong. You descend the far side and find the slope much steeper. That's the slip face, the side where sand avalanches when the pile becomes too steep to hold itself together. Each mini-slide reshapes the dune, pushing it forward. It's a delicate balance of wind, gravity, and inertia. Quirky fact, dunes are the only landforms with a memory. No, they won't remember your name, but they do retain the effects of past winds, preserving patterns in layers like tree rings. Slice a dune open, and you'll find history written sideways in swirls of sediment, each line a story of direction, strength, and change. You reach a flatter plain between dunes called the interdune. It's like a breath between words. Here, you see small shrubs clinging to survival, their roots stretching deep into hidden water reserves. Some desert plants trap sand intentionally, anchoring themselves with tiny dunes of their own. Not because they're stubborn, but because they're smart. In this space, you see the remains of an old road, partially buried. The white line is faded. A rusted sign leans at an awkward angle, half-eaten by the dune beside it. You can just make out the word "stop," which is adorable, considering how much the sand clearly doesn't care. Roads are temporary here, so are fences, pipelines, and even buildings. The sand doesn't destroy them violently, it just ignores them, slowly, relentlessly, politely smothering them under waves of time. You sit again, letting the wind push sand against your legs. It piles there without asking, trying to turn you into a feature of the land. If you stayed still long enough, you'd disappear too. There's a particular kind of loneliness here, but it's not sad, it's spacious. These dunes have moved for centuries, long before you and long after, and yet they carry no malice. They're just doing what they do, moving. Historians still debate whether ancient nomadic tribes tracked dune movements or simply adapted as they went. Some say they had maps not of cities, but of dunes, moving markers in a shifting world. It makes sense. When the land itself migrates, the map must learn to dance. You move again, trudging up another ridge, and the wind whistles in your ears. You spot something ahead, metal partly buried, a structure. No, just a skeleton of a machine. A rusted backhoe, half swallowed, its shovel pointing to the sky like a question. It reminds you of a joke. What's the desert's favorite snack? Anything left unattended. You laugh softly. The wind catches it and scatters it. And then just beyond the ridge, a new sight, a series of crescent-shaped dunes arranged like a procession, marching in order like they're on some pilgrimage. They're barkhans too, but smaller, more mobile. These are the scouts. Satellite imagery has shown that these types of dunes can overtake slower-moving dunes, merging or absorbing them. Imagine that, landforms with traffic issues. Some even race each other. A few win. You pause and think, these dunes aren't just scenery, they're participants. They respond to wind patterns, climate shifts, vegetation changes. Some scientists are studying them to predict future weather. Others look to dunes for clues about Mars. Yes, Mars has dunes too, giant ones, ghostly ones. Some haven't moved in thousands of years. Others may still be inching forward, grain by grain, on a planet with almost no atmosphere. You wonder if there's a Martian rover out there right now, caught in a small drift, stuck in a landscape made of frozen motion. Even light years away, sand never stops. You stand again and look back over the path you took. Gone. Wiped clean by the wind. The dune you climbed earlier already looks different. And the one ahead, it's waiting. The dunes keep moving. And so do you. You walk into a valley between two low dunes, the wind calmer here, the sand lying in quiet folds. There's a stillness that feels earned, like the landscape just finished rehearsing something wild and finally took a breath. You pause, grateful for the silence, until you hear it. Not from above, not from behind, but from beneath. A hum, a moan, a low, vibrating sound that seems to rise from the ground itself. It stops, then starts again, longer this time, deep and eerie, like the land is exhaling in slow motion. You're not imagining it. You've entered the domain of the singing sand. It doesn't sound like music exactly, not unless your taste leans toward experimental doom ambience. It's more like a sound caught between worlds, part whale song, part subway tunnel, part haunted harmonica in a minor key. And it's very, very real. You slide your foot across the sand experimentally. Nothing. Then again, harder this time. And suddenly, a low womb echoes out, trailing after your movement like a ghostly tailpipe. You freeze. Okay, so the sand sings. Cool, also slightly creepy. Scientists call this phenomenon booming or singing sand. It's been reported in deserts from California to China, Morocco to Mongolia. And while it was once dismissed as myth, local legends of whispering dunes or desert spirits, modern acoustics has confirmed the reality. Under the right conditions, sand can sing. You crouch and take a closer look at the grains. They're unusually round, all about the same size and covered in a thin coating of silica. These features, along with very dry conditions, create the perfect setting for friction-induced sound. When the grains cascade down a dune slip face in just the right way, they generate synchronized vibrations. Think of it like millions of grains squeaking in harmony. If the slip is big enough, the sound can last for minutes and reach up to 105 decibels. That's louder than a lawnmower. From sand. Historians still argue whether Marco Polo truly heard the singing sands of the Gobi, or if his tales were enhanced a little for dramatic effect. But the phenomenon has been mentioned in texts as far back as the 13th century. In some Bedouin traditions, the sound was believed to be the voice of jinn. In others, the dunes were thought to be mourning, wailing for lost travelers, or ancient cities swallowed by sand. You drag your palm across the surface. A soft squeak responds. It's not quite a song, more like a test. The sand, apparently, is picky about its performances. It doesn't happen just anywhere. Only certain dunes under very specific conditions can sing. The humidity must be low. The grains must be dry, rounded, and free of dust. Even the temperature matters. Like any great vocalist, the sand needs to warm up. Quirky detail. In the Kelso Dunes of California, researchers studying the sound had to climb halfway up the dune, trigger a slide, and then ride the sand wave down like a sandy surfboard, all while holding microphones and geophones. Science is often ridiculous and excellent. You try your own mini avalanche, just a handful of sand cascading from your palm. It hisses faintly, a soft purr, close but not quite performance-ready. Still, the acoustics around you are strange. Your footsteps sound slightly distorted, muffled on one frequency and echoing on another. The dune itself acts like an amplifier, carrying the tiniest vibrations and transforming them into resonance. You speak aloud, and the sand seems to hold the words a little too long. You step back, slightly unnerved. It feels like the ground is listening. Then again, maybe it is. Sand is, after all, a natural recorder. It captures footprints, fossil imprints, wind direction, rainfall patterns, and apparently sound. Researchers have begun to study desert acoustics to understand how these vibrations might help us predict dune movement or detect changes in subsurface structure. You wonder what it would take to build an instrument out here. Not a flute or a drum, but something collaborative. Something where the sand sings with you, not because of you. Maybe that's what the dunes have been waiting for all along, an audience that doesn't want to control the stage. You climb higher, dragging your feet deliberately across the slope. A lower, longer tone emerges, resonant and sustained. It rolls through your soles and up your legs like a tuning fork. You stop and listen. Then you do it again. Same movement, same sound. You're jamming with the landscape now. This is less science and more science. The vibrations are tactile. You feel them in your chest. It's a lullaby played in sub-bass, a bedtime story told by the earth itself. Historians still debate whether ancient desert travelers used the sound of singing dunes as a form of navigation. Could you steer your caravan by frequency? Follow the song to shelter. There are stories, fragmented, mostly oral, of tribes that knew which dunes were safe by the way they spoke in the wind. You sit and let yourself slide slightly down the slope, sending another small avalanche hissing below. It sings back, a short, descending note like a sigh. Maybe this is the only concert where the performer is also the audience. You close your eyes, letting the hum seep into your bones. It's oddly calming, meditative. The same frequencies that give singing dunes their voice are close to those used in sound healing therapies. Vibrations tuned to the human body. The earth, quite literally, humming you to sleep. And here's the strange part. It's not even the only sound desert sands make. In some places, the grains don't boom. They bark, hiss, or even chirp. Walk along a particular kind of dry beach sand and you'll hear tiny squeaks with every step. That's due to the grain shape and how they rub together. Frictional noise. Every beach has a voice if you're quiet enough to hear it. You lie back on the slope, staring up at the widening sky. The sun's edge is peeking over a distant ridge, and the first rays hit the sand beside you, turning it from gray to gold in an instant. The warmth spreads slowly, and with it, the sound fades. The moment's over. For now. But you know the dune is still listening. And later, maybe tonight, maybe next century, it will sing again. You leave the singing dune behind, its fatting echo still reverberating faintly in your ears. The wind has settled again, just enough for the silence to stretch out between your steps, soft and wide. The desert is holding its breath, but under the surface, the sand is doing what it always does. Hiding things. You crest a low hill and suddenly feel it. Not in the wind, not in the air, in your gut. That strange, electric tug of standing somewhere ancient, somewhere secret. You look out over the landscape, and though everything seems ordinary, just more undulating dunes and ripples, something beneath the surface is different here. Something is buried. You kneel and dig with your hands, fingers sifting through layers. The grains here are finer, almost silky and cooler beneath the top layer. After a few scoops, your fingers hit something solid. Stone worked stone. You clear more away, uncovering the edge of what looks like a carved slab. It's not just a rock, it's a piece of something larger, architecture. You glance around. The rest must be beneath the sand. You've just stumbled onto one of sand's best-kept talents, preserving the past by hiding it in plain sight. From temples to tombs, markets to manuscripts, the sand buries and protects. Not on purpose, obviously. Sand doesn't have a plan, but what it covers, it often preserves. Historians still argue whether the burial of certain ancient cities, like Tanis in Egypt or Ubar, the so-called Atlantis of the sands, was entirely natural or if people fled and let the dunes do the rest. In either case, what remained was hidden, silent, waiting. You brush more sand from the slab, revealing faint symbols. Maybe writing, maybe just decorative carving. It doesn't matter right now. What matters is that it's here, untouched, unweathered, perfectly preserved beneath the shifting surface. Sand may be relentless, but it's also patient. You think of Petra again, those ornate facades carved into desert cliffs. Once vibrant with markets and festivals, now half hidden behind dunes and stone. Or of Pompeii, not buried by sand but by ash, yet sharing the same eerie quiet of things interrupted mid-story. And then there's the Valley of the Kings, where tomb after tomb was discovered under layers of desert sand. Howard Carter's famous phrase rings in your ears, "Wonderful things." But for centuries, the only thing guarding those treasures was sand. You step back from the slab and imagine what else could be here. Entire cities may lie beneath your feet. Buildings, streets, altars, wells. The earth has a way of erasing its own footprints, but sand is the medium that allows them to be recovered. Quirky side note. In some parts of the Middle East and North Africa, sand has preserved ancient texts, scrolls, parchments, tablets. The dryness slows decay to a crawl. A few degrees more humidity and those stories would have been dust. Instead, they wait. You move deeper into the landscape and now your eyes start playing tricks on you. Is that just a dune? Or is it a buried wall, that long bump part of a collapsed roof? You can't tell. And that's the thing about sand. It levels everything. Noble or mundane, treasure or trash, it all gets the same treatment. In the Taklamakan Desert in China, for example, explorers have found Buddhist temples, mummified remains, and even ancient shoes beneath the dunes. Some over 3,000 years old, perfectly preserved. The desert took them, sure, but it didn't destroy them. You imagine the desert as a kind of reluctant librarian, not organized exactly, but careful. Everything gets filed. Someday, someone might come digging, might come looking, or not. The sand doesn't care either way. You walk on and spot something else, a sharp edge poking from the sand. Metal this time, a spearhead, a tool. You pick it up carefully. It's old, rusted, fragile, but it's survived, buried and ignored. That's the desert's superpower. Historians still debate whether the discovery of buried ruins influences modern desert development. Should we build over them? Leave them untouched? It's a constant negotiation between the past and the present, but the sand always gets the last word. And the sand is full of stories. In Saudi Arabia, entire lost cities have been rediscovered through satellite imaging, revealing man-made structures beneath what seemed like untouched dunes. In Peru, Nazca lines, giant geoglyphs, lie on the desert floor, visible only from above, preserved because the sand and wind chose not to cover them. For now. You pause beside a shallow dip in the ground. There's a faint, circular outline too perfect to be natural. A well, maybe, or the rim of a collapsed structure. You take a moment to rest your hand on the sand. It's warm now, but just beneath it's cooler, still, waiting. You wonder if someone else stood here long ago, watching the sun rise over the same ridge. Maybe they were building, maybe they were leaving, maybe they buried something themselves, hoping it'd be found later. Sand is a time capsule, but it's also a vault. It doesn't give up its secrets easily. You look up, scanning the horizon for anything out of place, and spot a slight shadow just a few feet tall, peeking from the top of a nearby dune. You climb, slow and deliberate, and as you reach the summit, you see it clearly. A corner of stone, weathered but still sharp, the top of a buried column maybe, or an altar. You can see inscriptions not readable from here but definitely deliberate, man-made, ancient. You don't need to uncover the rest. It's enough to know it's there. And somewhere nearby, other things lie just beneath the surface. An amphora, a shoe, a coin, a bone, a name. The sand isn't trying to hide them, it's just holding them. And if no one comes to claim them, well, that's fine too. Because down here, in the slowest silence imaginable, memory and matter become the same thing, and they are in very good hands. The sun hangs higher now, casting short shadows across the dunes and painting the sand in richer golds and ambers. The air is dry, the breeze low and steady. You walk slowly, deliberately, as if each step might uncover something. Not a buried ruin this time, but something even older. Something that doesn't require excavation, only listening. Because not all that sand carries is physical. Some grains carry stories. You pause at the base of a dune and feel it again. That strange, subtle hush that isn't silence. It's presence. It's the weight of legend clinging to the air, nestled into the sand, waiting for you to sit and listen. And so you do. You press your back against the slope, close your eyes, and let the stories rise. The first one is a whisper. Once, they say, a god was born from the desert wind, formed not from clay or flame or water, but from sand itself, shaped by swirling dunes and given breath by the hot gusts of midday. He walked barefoot across the Sahara, leaving behind trails of fertile soil where his feet touched, turning sand to grain, wind to song. But he grew tired of humans who built walls and wanted to trap the wind. So he walked deeper into the dunes and vanished, his footprints still shifting somewhere beneath your toes. You open your eyes. Historians still argue whether the Bedouin myths of Re-al-Jinn, the wind of spirits, were metaphors for dust storms or allegories for wandering prophets. Either way, they left behind a beautiful fear. The desert is never empty. You walk again, cresting a dune where the sand seems to hum beneath the breeze. Here, the tailies feel thicker, heavier, like they were just spoken. You imagine an ancient caravan pausing here, merchants seated in a circle, sipping from goatskin flasks, recounting the legends that held the dunes at bay. One man speaks of Iram of the Pillars, a legendary city said to have rivaled Babylon in wealth and beauty. Built by the descendants of Noah, it glittered with towers of gold and ivory. But its people became arrogant, so the gods buried it beneath the sand. It's still there, they say, a perfect city under the dunes, waiting for someone to dig too deep. A few explorers claim to have found it. Some say it's Ubar, discovered via satellite in the early 90s. Others say it's nothing but mirage and myth. The desert doesn't say. You think of mirages now, those wavering, watery illusions that flicker across the heat-tripled horizon. You've probably seen one before, that shimmer that tricks the eyes into thinking there's a lake just ahead, always just ahead. Ancient armies chased them, Travelers swore by them. Some said they weren't just light tricks, but warnings, ghost stories made visible. There's a tale of a caravan that followed a mirage for days, only to arrive and find not water, but a reflection of their own village buried long ago. Quirky detail: the word mirage comes from the Latin mirare, meaning to wonder, which is perfect, really, because that's what these tales do. They don't explain, they don't clarify, they wonder. You wonder too, especially when you find the bones. Not human, you hope. A sun-bleached ribcage, likely from a camel or desert antelope, mostly buried in a shallow scoop of sand. But near it, something odd: 3 pebbles arranged in a triangle. Intentional. A sign, a game, a ritual. You've heard stories about desert shrines. Not big temples, just small arrangements. A pile of stones, a circle of sticks, offerings to the sand spirits. To keep the dunes at bay, to ask for safe passage, maybe just to be remembered. In some Saharan cultures, travelers bury letters in the sand, scratched onto wood or cloth or leather, and leave them at specific dunes, believing the wind will carry their message. Not literally, but spiritually. You kind of love that. You take 3 small stones from your pocket and place them beside the triangle, not for any particular reason, just in case someone is listening. The breeze picks up again, and you hear a low, rhythmic tone. Not the singing of the dunes, but something older, deeper, a memory. You recall another tale, a favorite from the Silk Road. A merchant traveling alone gets lost in a sandstorm. After hours of wandering, he finds a glowing city in the distance, lit by blue fire. The gates open, music pours out. He enters, dines, dances, falls asleep. When he wakes, he's alone in the sand, his hands clutching a bowl of glass that had been full of wine. The glass melts in his fingers. The city is gone. Legend says he walked forever after that, chasing the mirage, bowl in hand, hoping to return. Historians still debate whether these stories stem from real hallucinations or ancient ruins swallowed by sand. Maybe both, but it's undeniable. The desert inspires myth like a flame inspires shadow. You climb another dune and find a small indentation, clearly a man-made seat scooped into the slope. Someone sat here before you, not yesterday probably, but at some point. Maybe they told a story here too. Maybe they listened to one. You lie back and stare at the sky, cloudless, unforgiving, timeless. The sand shifts beneath your body, adjusting, shaping itself to hold you. It's surprisingly comfortable. Or maybe you're just tired. Doesn't matter. You close your eyes again, and more stories float in. One about a girl who could summon oases with her footsteps, but only when walking backward. One about a buried harp that plays only when the wind is right. One about a dune that moves in a perfect circle every year and always returns to the same spot, as if looking for something. These stories have no endings, no morals, just shapes in the sand. You sit up, the triangle of pebbles is still there, unmoved. And in the distance, the dunes rise again, tall, curved, silent. But not empty. Never empty. You wake to silence again, but it's a different kind this time. Crisper, thinner, stretched across a landscape that feels like Earth, but not quite. The air is lighter, the light paler, the sand under you, still sand, but the color is wrong. It's gray, maybe even bluish, and it's clinging to you with too much enthusiasm, sticking to your suit, your boots, your gloves like it's magnetized. You're not on Earth anymore. Welcome to the sands of another world. You brush your hands together and rise slowly, the horizon a vast expanse of barren beauty. Ahead lies a dune field, gentle ripples carved by wind just like back home, except there's no real wind, at least not how you know it. The sky above is dusty orange, muted by a thin, alien atmosphere. You're standing on Mars. That's right, even here, millions of miles from home, sand follows. Mars has dunes, ripples, and drifts, some eerily familiar, others completely unlike anything on Earth. And just like back home, Martian sand tells stories, different ones, harsher ones, but stories all the same. You begin walking. The grains underfoot are fine, too fine. They feel almost silky, and they squeak under your boots, just like desert sands do on Earth. But these grains are not shaped by flowing water or tumbling rivers. They're made by relentless, slow abrasion, pulverized by billions of years of impact and freeze-thaw cycles. Historians still argue whether Mars ever had rivers powerful enough to carry and round sand like Earth's. There's evidence of ancient water flows, meandering channels and dry deltas etched into Martian rock. But whether those rivers lasted long enough to form proper sedimentary systems is up for debate. Either way, the sand remains. And the dunes here are alive, moving, shifting, inching their way across the landscape in time-lapse footage captured by satellites and rovers. You've seen it. NASA's high-resolution cameras have watched Martian dunes migrate over months and years, proving that even in the thin atmosphere, wind has its way. Quirky fact, some Martian dunes appear to have recurring slope lineae, dark streaks that scientists once thought were briny water flows. Now many suspect it's just dry sand cascading downslope, reacting to the planet's wild temperature swings. No water, just motion. You crest a dune and pause to look around. Some of the formations resemble Earth's crescent-shaped barcons. Others form massive star dunes, radiating like points on a compass. And then there are the ripples, so finely spaced, so perfectly uniform they look manufactured. Nature's 3D printed art. You scoop up a handful of the sand, your glove protests a little, and examine the texture. It's rich in basalt, the volcanic rock that covers much of Mars. This gives the sand its darker tone. Unlike Earth's quartz-rich beaches, Martian sand is magnetic. The grains contain iron oxides, especially hematite, giving large swaths of Mars that iconic reddish tint. You may recall this from school. The red planet isn't red because of lava. It's red because its dust is rust. Literally. Oxidized iron particles, ground so fine they hang in the air for weeks at a time. And if you thought Earth had dust storms, well, buckle up. Mars has dust devils visible from orbit, planet-wide dust storms that last for months. In 2018, one of these storms enveloped the entire planet, blocking out sunlight and ending NASA's Opportunity rover mission. The final message from OPI still echoes in the minds of space nerds everywhere. My battery is low and it's getting dark. You take another step, careful not to stir up too much dust. It's dangerous here, not just for machines, but for humans. Martian sand is sharp, angular, untouched by water, unrounded by time. Breathing it in would shred your lungs. No moisture, no bacteria to break it down. Just sterilized fragments of volcanic glass, ready to cling to everything and ruin your air filters. And then there's the static. Mars's dry environment, low gravity, and fine grain size combine to create a highly charged environment. The sand doesn't just stick, it grabs. Some engineers joke that Martian dust has the personality of a toddler, clingy, unpredictable, and possibly fatal. Historians still argue whether future Martian habitats will have to be built underground just to avoid sand infiltration. Rovers already suffer from grit in joints and motors. Any long-term colony will have to account for the fact that Martian sand is basically weaponized powder. You crouch again and look closer. Some grains shimmer faintly. That's olivine, another volcanic mineral. On Earth, it weathers quickly. On Mars, with no rain and minimal atmosphere, it sticks around. A lot longer than you will. But it's not all menace and mess. Sand might be the key to survival on Mars. Some researchers propose melting Martian sand to create glass or bricks, using 3D printers with regolith ink. Essentially, Martian soil mixed with binders could allow settlers to build habitats, landing pads, even roads, all from the sand beneath their boots. There's a weird beauty in that. The very thing that could destroy a rover might also build a home. You walk on and notice patterns, long, sinuous trails almost like burrows. No animals made them, of course. These are created by wind-driven vortices, tracing paths through the sand. Still, they look alive. In the distance, the shadow of Olympus Mons, the tallest volcano in the solar system, rises like a god. Its flanks are covered in landslides, old lava flows, and sand. Always sand. Quirky note: the slopes of Olympus Mons are so gentle you could bike up them, assuming you didn't suffocate or die horribly first. You chuckle softly. Even on Mars, the sand has jokes. You stop walking and just breathe. Well, not really, you're in a suit, but you imagine breathing, imagine taking in the dry mineral scent of a place untouched by life. The silence is perfect, not empty, just full of potential. You wonder what future historians will say about the first footprints in Martian sand. Not rover tracks, human steps. Will they treat it as a leap, a folly, a conquest? And what of the sand itself? Will it remember? Back on Earth, the Sahara whispers of pharaohs and caravans. Martian sand has no such memories, yet, but it will. If we stay long enough, if we build, if we leave behind machines and messages and footprints, we'll write ourselves into this dust too. You stoop, press your glove into the dune slope, and leave a handprint. It will likely be there for centuries, unless the wind decides otherwise. You press your palm deeper into the Martian sand, feel the granular resistance through your glove. It holds your print perfectly, each curve and ridge of your hand outlined in iron-rich dust. There's no wind to erase it right away. No rain, no footsteps behind you. It just sits there, your mark on a world that doesn't yet know you exist. But it will, because sand, whether on Earth, Mars, or the Moon, remembers. You begin walking again, across the gently undulating terrain. The sand here tells no lies. There are no forests to overgrow ruins, no rivers to swallow evidence. What we leave behind on sand stays visible longer than almost any other surface. We've been etching our stories into it for tens of thousands of years. The first human footprints, in sand, preserved by chance, buried and revealed again by time, like those found in White Sands, New Mexico, where ancient tracks stretch across what was once a lakeshore, now a gypsum desert. Some are over 20,000 years old. You can see where children played, where someone carried another, where a mammoth walked by later. The sand remembered it all. Historians still argue whether these footprints mark seasonal migration or permanent settlement, but no one denies their power, their time made visible. And they weren't carved in marble, they were pressed into something soft, fleeting, and fragile, which might be why they've lasted so long. Sand has always been a reluctant archivist. It doesn't try to record us, but it does. Our footprints, our cities, our waste. Oh, the waste. You look around the alien desert and wonder what we'll leave behind here. Not just footprints, but trash, tire tracks, satellite parts, Elon's car probably, and back home, we've already been doing it for centuries. You picture a single grain of earth sand under a microscope. Rounded, pale, quartz probably, but now look closer. You might see flecks of plastic, microbeads, nanoparticles. Modern sand is changing, contaminated by human debris. Glitter, rubber, nylon, traces of toothpaste and detergent and cosmetics. Our legacy is starting to look a lot like glittery garbage. Quirky fact: studies have found microplastics in remote deserts, embedded in dunes thought to be untouched by civilization. The wind carries our fingerprints farther than we can imagine. And it's not just garbage. Sand holds onto radioactive isotopes from nuclear tests, like those performed in Nevada and Bikini Atoll. The trinitite glass left behind at the Trinity site is fused desert sand, flash melted by the first atomic bomb. It still glows green under the right light. So yes, sand remembers. And what it remembers isn't always kind. You keep walking, this time imagining not just the past, but the future. What if an archaeologist lands on Earth 10,000 years from now? What will the dunes reveal? A crushed smartphone, A pair of sunglasses, a plastic toothbrush, maybe a fossilized flip-flop, bits of concrete, silica wafers from obsolete computers, broken glass, bottles, beads. They'll find our stories scattered, not in libraries but in landfills. And yet there's poetry in that too. Because even microplastic has a narrative. It says, someone lived here, someone built things, someone danced barefoot on this beach, someone dropped this keychain in the sand and didn't realize it would outlive their entire civilization. You pause and dig with your boot just out of habit. Back home, this might have unearthed a bottle cap, a coin, a chip bag. Out here, it's just more sand. But that might change. If we settle Mars, we'll build, we'll discard, we'll litter. And Martian sand, thin as it is, will become an archivist too. It'll remember when the first colony was abandoned, when someone walked too far from the airlock, when a rover broke down and no one came to fix it. Historians still argue whether the Anthropocene, the human-shaped epoch, should be marked by climate data, extinction rates, or the spread of synthetic materials. But if the marker is physical, if it's something buried in the earth for the next dominant species to discover, it'll probably be found in sand. Because the ocean floor may churn, the forests may rot, but the dunes, they whisper, they shift, they cover, but they hold on. And then there are the intentional marks, our graffiti in the grains. You remember the Nazca lines again, giant drawings scraped into desert crust, visible only from above. A monkey, a hummingbird, a spider, purposefully crafted in a way that resists erosion. A message to gods, to aliens, to the future. We've been trying to make sand remember us for longer than we've known how to spell. You climb another rise and look down at the wide Martian plain below. Already, you imagine what someone might find here in 1,000 years. Your boot print, a forgotten probe, a message etched into a solar panel frame. We were here. There's something deeply human about trying to be remembered, about turning the most temporary material, sand, into a record. That's what glass is, after all. Melted sand frozen into clarity. We used it to make lenses to read the stars, to build screens that show our thoughts, even mirrors. Glass is how we reflect ourselves back. And it starts with sand. You bend down and draw a simple spiral in the dust with your finger. It catches the light. Then the breeze picks up, faint, barely a whisper, but enough. The spiral fades. You smile. Because even when the sand forgets, you remember. You know the line you drew, the story you told. You were here and that was enough. Maybe that's the lesson. Sand doesn't have to preserve everything. It's okay if some footprints disappear, if some castles fall, if some stories get buried. Because others won't. And those that do, well, sometimes being buried is how legends begin. You linger on the ridge a little longer, gazing down at the quiet landscape that somehow feels fuller than any city skyline. There's no sound but your own breath in the helmet, no movement but the drift of dust over your boots. Yet the silence is anything but empty. It's loaded, dense with presence, with layers, with memory, and above all, with transformation. You begin your descent slowly, one step at a time, grains shifting underfoot. Each movement presses you further into the realization that sand is not a destination. It's a process. It's the evidence of time at work. Everything you've walked through, climbed over, touched, or slipped on was once something else. A mountain, a reef, a volcano, a bone. And eventually, it will be something else again. You reach the bottom and turn back. Your footprints trail behind you like punctuation marks in a very long, very quiet poem. Already, the wind has started to smooth them. In a few minutes, they'll be gone. No one will ever know you were here, except you. And the sand, of course. You walk onward slowly. Not because you're tired, though let's be honest, you kind of are, but because there's no reason to rush. This last stretch is about reflection. You've seen the sand in every shape now, jagged, soft, volcanic, alien. You've seen it build cities, swallow them, capture songs, cradle myths. And now, all that's left is to witness what comes next. You reach a new rise, smaller this time, crest it and find something unexpected. A stone perfectly round, smooth, black as obsidian, resting atop the sand like it grew there. You pick it up and it's warm, not from sunlight but from friction. Time has smoothed it this way, tumbling it through rivers, glaciers, oceans, perhaps even fire. A perfect metaphor dropped like a mic. Because this is the last grain. Not the last literally, of course. There are trillions more. But symbolically, you've reached the end of the trail. You close your hand around the stone and sit down in the sand, the grains shifting to hold you, as they always do. You think back to the beginning, to the towering mountains that fractured, the volcanoes that shattered, the rivers that carved. You think of the parrotfish and its poops on beaches, of Martian dunes and migrating deserts, of sandcastles that collapse and singing dunes that moan like old cellos. You remember the lost cities, the smuggled grains, the footprints buried and the dreams etched. And through it all, you start to understand, sand is not just a substance, it's a cycle, a witness, a companion. Historians still argue whether the very first human tools were made from stone or sand-carved bone. But what they agree on is this: without sand, we wouldn't have gotten far. No shelter, no glass, no timekeeping, no computers, no roads. You look at the sky. It's deep and wide and endlessly quiet, but below you, the ground hums. Sand is always moving, always planning its next form. Quirky detail. In recent years, engineers have begun experimenting with liquid sand as a construction material, using air bubbles to make it behave like a fluid. It sounds ridiculous, but it works. Sand, once again, proves it has range. You shift your weight and the grains around you adjust like an adaptive chair. Supportive, yet disinterested. The perfect co-pilot. Your eyes close for a moment. You think of the ancient temples once protected by layers of sand, of the petroglyphs etched into sandstone walls that survived thousands of years, of the microplastics now laced into beach sediment, of the future archaeologists who will study the dunes like we read books. You wonder what your own legacy will be, what you've left behind, what grains you've shifted. And then you realize, maybe that's not the point. Maybe sand doesn't care what's remembered. Maybe it just cares that something happened, that something changed, that someone was here. You press your palm flat against the ground, feeling the texture one last time. It's soft, stubborn, full of mystery. Some grains are sharp, some are smooth. Some are ancient and others formed just yesterday. But they all move forward. And so will you. Because when everything breaks down, when the structures fall, when the cities fade, when even the bones give way, what's left is the sand. And in that sand, the story continues. Grain by grain. Forever,